Hey guys, here we are for part 4, taking a look at RaceRoom on the grid in a Prototype 2, LMP2 type car at Portimao. It's an AI race starting at the back again. And the first thing, man, that I noticed with RaceRoom is that the AI is very good, very solid in this game. So I set the time of day to sunset. Oh, there's a little bit of an accident here. And I think the game actually looked the best to me in this kind of time of day setting. There doesn't necessarily seem to be a full time of day in RaceRoom. I'm not sure about that, but as far as setting a single player race time anyway, you can just choose different times of day. So, but yeah, speaking of that, let's start off by talking about just how the game looks and how it plays. I am playing on a monitor here. I couldn't get VR to work. So RaceRoom is an old ISI motor, so kind of R-Factor 1 motor game, I believe. I think it's technically maybe the predecessor of the GTR2 Simbin titles. So yeah, it's but then also the graphics engine is quite old, so I'm pretty sure this is still DirectX 9, which is why it looks somewhat simplified. The lighting is a bit simple. The dashes in the car look a little bit 2D, and I think they are pretty much two-dimensional in some ways. So VR does work in the game, and it does have triple screen support, so that's good. That's probably the best thing about this, is that RaceRoom has developed it to pretty extreme levels, just like a game like Assetto Corsa has been developed and modded. Well, in this case, the developers have taken RaceRoom essentially about as far as I think it probably can go with the current engine that it's on. So it looks okay, it looks good, it's definitely drivable, it's definitely enjoyable, but it's not as high res or look as good as iRacing or really any other more modern sim. So yeah, it's a little bit dated looking for sure. But as you can see, the car is pretty stable to drive. And just moving into talking about how the cars drive a bit, I drove a few different cars. You can see that little bit of loss of traction, not loss of traction, looked a little strange, but and you get a little bit of that where the way the grip comes and goes sometimes is a little weird, let's say. So when I first booted the game up and I bought the starter pack, and I was just driving different cars trying to kind of get myself used to this sim again, because it's been a while since I played it and I haven't put a whole lot of hours in it anyway. And coming from playing iRacing not too long ago, it is about as 180 as you can get. So in this sim, it can be quite difficult at first to actually find the limit of the tire. That was my experience anyway, is that finding the end of the grip was somewhat tricky. It was difficult to do. And eventually you can find it, and overall the edge of grip is very tolerable, very easy to drive at for the most part. There are a few cases where you can get a bit of snap oversteer, and that's okay, that does happen, so that's not completely unfounded. And like coming up over this crest right here, you can see that's very progressive loss of grip, but depending on the traction control setting of the car, you could easily have a total snap oversteer there. So it's a little hard to find the edge of the grip. The cars feel a little maybe too glued to the road surface at times, and maybe they feel lively enough, but you kind of get a bit of a sense that there's almost too much grip at times. But overall, I mean, the way the tires actually function is way more enjoyable to me than iRacing, because you can actually drive the car, you can push the car, you can find the edge of the grip limit, and you can kind of try to dance around that, whereas in iRacing, of course, and I don't want to make this about that, but it's just the complete opposite approach, right? So this game is certainly designed more to allow you to try to find the edge of grip and even go over it a bit. And as you can see, like, there's a bit of punishment there. I slid a bit too much, lost the rear end, and I lost time. You can see the car in front of me pulled away a bit. But it's not like the tires went over an edge for 5 seconds, or that, you know, I was able to just power through the slide and gain time. So I think in that sense it works pretty well. And to go along with that, the force feedback in the game. At first I had to tweak the settings. I know they've done a lot of force feedback updates in the last maybe a couple years, and they are, you know, it's a lot better than I guess it used to be. It feels really good overall. I think you can definitely sense the edge of the grip on the tires. It's a little, you kind of, in some ways you kind of just get a more constant heavy force on the wheel. There's not a lot of individual suspension movement that you feel through the wheel necessarily like an R Factor 2. But I think feeling the edge of the limit on the tire, this is better than something like R Factor 2. So overall, I thought the force feedback was pretty good once I kind of adapted to it just a little bit, and, you know, kind of figured out how it works and got the settings dialed in. So this car, to me, it sounds pretty good. Overall, I'd say the sounds are certainly passable, and I would think that on the more modern cars, or the more recent cars that they've released, that the sounds are probably better. I know the BMW M2, I think, that I drove, the CS, sounded quite good, and then the M3 GT3 car, maybe it's M4 GT3, whatever GT3 car BMW is, it sounded quite good. But then some of the other cars, like the Formula 4, didn't sound as good to me, and like one of the old Mercedes DTMs I drove also kind of sounded a bit maybe hollow, maybe a bit empty. So overall, you know, I mean, the game sounds good. It does communicate tire sounds. Everything's really adjustable in the sounds, so that's nice. That you can change, you know, wind noise and tire scrub and transmission whine and even ambient sounds and things, so that they do have a lot of adjustment in it, and I think in that sense it's good enough. But, you know, I don't think it's top of the line. You can see here the AI is actually very enjoyable to race. This was quite a surprise for me. I think this might be the best AI I've played in any sim, and I didn't really expect that here. You could see at the beginning of the race they did crash, but you know, they got through it okay. One car had a spin. They kind of went over the curb. They struggle a bit in slow corners, which is pretty common for AI in general, I think. But man, they're really good in race. They're actually pretty difficult to pass. They will hold a line, but they don't run into you. They don't knock you off the track. They don't, you know, destroy your race. Whereas again, with some other sims, you know, you kind of have to restart the race 4 or 5 times to get a good one. I never had to do that here. Other than maybe they would wreck themselves a bit, you know, to varying degrees. I never had a problem racing them, and it was actually very fun to race them. And as you can see, they hold pace well. I think this is at 100%, and yeah, they had a good spread pace between, you know, the fastest and the slowest cars. The one thing I found like this is I could go around the outside of the car, and at times it would kind of almost confuse them, or they weren't sure where to put their car because I was outside of theirs, and so they would definitely lift off in that case. You could get past them. I think I do that maybe right here. I don't know. See, like right there, he battled well. So I mean, it was a nice surprise to see that. I did check out the multiplayer, and obviously I took a look at all the content, and it was a little hard to follow and confusing at first. There's not a whole lot of players online at any given time on the servers. There are some. I think you could always find some sort of a session or a race that's unranked. But come to find out, they've got a full safety reputation and like a driver ELO rating. And then they put everyone in a class based on your, I don't know if it's based on your ranking or if it's just based on your safety rating, kind of like, iRacing, you can move up classes. But yeah, I mean, they've got a full integrated ranking system. They've got ranked races. They've got ranked leaderboards for hot lapping sessions, and they've got ranked championships even. So, and there seems to be a pretty decent player base. I think at the end of this race here, I show some of that. But just to get back to the actual race here, I had a lot of fun with this, like way more than I thought, and was kind of just thinking again how good some of the old stuff can be. It's just very funny that this is the state we find ourselves in. Is it the most realistic? Probably not. It's probably not on the very, it doesn't maybe stand up as well to more modern simulation in some cases, but I'll tell you what, it's really solid and has a lot of content available. That's one other thing I would say is the track models were not maybe quite as good. Some of them anyway, like Laguna Seca and Monza didn't kind of have the same look. I don't know if they're just older models, and I don't know how RaceRoom has developed their models, if they're laser scanned or if they are just kind of older school built models. I would guess that they're somewhat laser scanned, but this Portimao was pretty solid and reminded me quite a bit of LMUs because I've been playing LMU a good bit as well, and so it felt certainly pretty close to it. And but yeah, some of the other tracks weren't maybe quite as good. And then I think that goes the same for the car models. Some of the car models, the newer ones, are going to be much more detailed, like the new Ferrari 296 GT3 car versus something like this older prototype, which I think has been around for quite some time. You can see the HUD. The HUD kind of grew on me. I didn't really like it at first, but and it's not what I would consider to be ideal, but it's very functional. It kind of stays out of your way, and you can move the HUD elements around. You can actually rescale them. Now the bar at the top is set there, and then there are some elements that appear and disappear at the start of the lap, which I don't know how I feel about that, because it's usually on a straightaway, so it's not going to be necessarily that intrusive, but it does kind of just pop up on your screen, and it's a little bit disrupting, to you. So I certainly wish you could just have that, and maybe you can turn it off, but you just either have it on and position it, like, see, it's kind of behind my camera, but you can see the deltas popping up over there, and then they disappear after a couple seconds. So, well, there's the end of that race. I went all the way from last to fourth because of the accident at turn 1, which also simulates a ranked race quite well. Here I was trying to get the car out of sorts. So you can see there, I mean, lost the rear end, but felt pretty good. It snaps back, but it's catchable. And then this car, you could actually lock it up, and it felt very progressive at lockup. I really liked how the force feedback, detailed that to you. So yeah, at 100%, the guy who finished last actually ran the fastest lap, or the closest lap to mine. I think I might have had fastest, but he was caught up in that wreck, I guess. So here's the menus. I'll just show you really quickly. This is a Saturday morning in the U.S., so there wasn't a whole lot of races in unranked, and then here's the 2 ranked races that popped up when you cycle ranked. There was no one in them. I'm not sure. I would think they just run back to back, so you know, whenever they get drivers, they go. So I'm curious. I think I might have to try some of those and just test them out and just see what the ranking system is, because I haven't done that yet. And then here's the competitions. So right now they're running BMW competitions. Obviously the BMW pack is kind of their newest pack. And then they've got free competitions that you can participate even if you don't own the car and track, so that's cool. And then obviously paid competitions where you do have to own the content. And these are hot laps competitions. Then there's another fixed setup race down there. So it's a bit all over the place, but I think it's quite good. I was pretty impressed with RaceRoom. So with that, let's move into the scoring. All right, y'all, let's score RaceRoom. That was a fun race, and it was enjoyable to get a victory, even though it was partially because of an AI crash, and maybe I didn't have them set quite fast enough. But anyway, I'm going to take it. All right, so getting into the scoring on RaceRoom, I really enjoyed RaceRoom, and I think it's a solid sim. Graphically, it's on an old engine. We know that. I believe still in DirectX 9, and while it's very functional and it looks good enough to race on, it's not it's dated. You can feel it, you can see it. So to me, it's above average because I think they've done really good things with what they've got, but certainly it kind of needs a new graphics engine at this point. I think everyone's been saying that, so I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10 here. Physics-wise, I really enjoyed how the cars drove and handled. The suspension felt quite detailed. I think this is based on an ISI physics model. Things maybe felt just slightly simplified or slightly too much grip in the car, but you did, sense body roll. You could feel it. You could. I went and drove the MX-5 car in a time trial, and it felt very similar to other MX-5s that I've driven in other sims. So I think the physics are very solid. I don't think they're quite iRacing level, but I'm going to give them an 8 out of 10. Now, tire-wise, the tires felt quite good, but a little bit interesting at first anyway. So at first it was strange because it was difficult to find the limit of grip, and I was a little surprised at that. It felt like the tires had maybe too much grip at first, but once I began to explore that, and depending on the car, because I tried several different cars over the course of a couple days, I found, okay, I can begin to sense where the limit is. Now, the tires did feel a little bit difficult still to get to the edge of grip, and then when they got to the edge, though, they felt really good most of the time, and you could drive them slightly over. You could see that in mine. So I would say the tires are maybe a little too grippy, and but it makes it very approachable, and I think in general it probably is best simulating GT cars, which is where the sim came from in the past, and some of the formula cars may or may not be as good, but I'm going to give tires a 7 out of 10. Force feedback wise, I thought it was very good, and it felt very similar to several other sims that have very good force feedback. You could feel what the tire was doing at the limit most all of the time, and it made it quite easy to counter steer and to drive on, where you could feel the tire kind of reaching that slip edge. So yeah, I think the force feedback's come a long way in RaceRoom, and I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 here. Now, the sounds in RaceRoom left a little bit to be desired for me. They were a little hollow sounding, maybe. I would guess that some of the newer content, and I did drive some of the new content, the new BMW GT3 car, definitely sounded better than the LMP2 car that I drove in the test drive. But overall, the sounds were definitely usable. You got good scrubbing sound from the tire, but they just didn't feel quite as natural. Maybe they just felt a little gamey in how they sounded. gamey. That's funny. But anyways, I'm going to give them a 7 out of 10. I think that's reasonable. Content-wise, there's a lot of content in RaceRoom. Obviously, it's a road racing sim. It doesn't do anything, you know, oval related. You know, and so it's limited largely to GT cars, although there are some Formula cars in there as well. And it doesn't maybe have all the tracks that you would want, but it certainly has a lot of content available. And everything that I drove felt like it was a quality enough to use, right? It wasn't, there was no car like in some other sims where you go, why is this here anymore, or why haven't they updated it? Now I didn't drive everything, of course, so there could be some stuff like that. Anyway, I'm going to rate the content at an 8 out of 10. I think it's actually very well put together, and I like the different series that they represent in this sim as well. Now, the AI and single player, I was actually quite pleasantly surprised by how good the AI drove. You can actually do AI championships, and there's an adaptive AI which apparently works pretty well. The AI was great. I'm saying it's a 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed the AI. It's one of those things where I could actually just drive this against the AI. It's quite good. Car contact also is quite forgiving, so it works. All right, so the multiplayer player base is there. I think it's similar on Steam anyway, similar to population-wise or concurrent players to something like AMS2 and, you know, Le Mans Ultimate. So, you know, it's there. There are enough players to find races most of the time, but there's not an overall ton of open servers all the time. The ranked stuff seems to be more scheduled for the most part, and so you kind of have to do a little, you know, searching, and you got to be available at times when they're there, unless you want to go do the time trials. So player base wise, I'd say it's definitely usable. You can find a race, or you can find some race to do. It's not great, and this is one of the signs of it just being an older sim. 6 out of 10. Now, the ranked system, I was very surprised, is actually all there in RaceRoom. They have a safety rating. They have a speed rating, or a, you know, I rating, so to speak. They have even classes that you can rank up to, and so all of these are there. They have incident points and that type of thing in the races. The track limits were very strict, I noticed that, but they have that in there. So they've really taken this engine to the very limit. You can actually even race, you know, they've got these little scheduled races against, or time trials against, real drivers. So I thought it was way more than I expected, and I actually think everything is there in the game for a rank system that you would want. So I think it's on par with iRacing. Maybe it's a little more confusing to follow, but I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10 here, because it's really all available, and you'd be surprised how many sims don't have that. And then the cost of the game. Technically, RaceRoom is free to play, but you know, you don't get very much content for free. It's going to be hard to find too much to do. Now, there's some content that you can do online for the time trials where it's content they let you use for free. So they do have that available. You can buy the Pro Pack, I think, for $45 US, and that has like 80% of the overall content of the game. So to me, that's pretty good. I mean, I mean, I know it's an older game, but to be able to get most of the content for $45, and then you can just piecemeal, you know, a car for $3 here, or a track for $4 or $5, it's not overly expensive, I don't think, for that, since you can buy a pack. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 on cost, because I think the point of entry to get into playing it is actually quite low in comparison to most other sims. And there you have it, RaceRoom. Currently 3rd out of 3 with a score of 77, very close, but I think it's a solid sim. I think the fact that it's close to RBR and iRacing is surprising to me, because I do think it was a lot more enjoyable than I thought it was going to be, and it has a lot more in it than I remember it having when I played it some years ago. So all right, well, that is the RaceRoom scored. In the next part of the series, we will drive R Factor 2, and we will score R Factor 2. So I hope to see you in that one. And until then, happy sim racing. Later, y'all.